So coming on screen, we have Utkarsh, Chief Architect, Flipkart, who will be getting into conversation with Pramod Varma, CTO EkStep Foundation, Chief Architect Aadhar and India Stack, co-founder Beacon Foundation. They will cover architecture patterns that make solutions evolvable and adaptable. How even when building for the future, the focus is still on implementing today, and how platform first mindset is required to evolve into protocols and specifications. Everyone in the comment box, type in welcome Utkarsh and Pramod.
Cool, we can get started. Pramod, you can unmute yourself. A very good morning to you, Pramod, and good evening to rest of you. It's been a really long day, and I thought no better way to end the day than having a really informal and almost like a fireside chat without the obvious fire between us with Pramod, right? So it's an absolute pleasure and honor to have you here, Dr. Pramod, for this chat.
Pleasure to be here.
And Pramod, as I don't think he needs a formal introduction, at least to this audience. But for any of you who is not acquainted, he's the CTO of the EkStep Foundation, which is invested in creating building blocks that provide learning opportunities for 200 million children in India. Besides this, he continues to be the Chief Architect of Aadhar India Stack, and also is the co-founder of Beacon Foundation, which you would be hearing a lot more recently and also in the times to come. And we all are also aware of how India Stack has been unlocking values at different touch points. And I believe most importantly, touch points and value proposition directly to the masses. We'll be engaging in a conversation on big picture of building a digital backbone for 1 billion people and touch upon facets which are probably behind the scenes. To promote a very quick introduction and setting the stage from you before we get started.
Yeah, so it's wonderful to be here. And I know, I think I seem to show up in many of your events over the last few years. Huge fan of what you guys do at Flipkart, especially the energy amount put for the architecture and definitely for open sourcing. I think you guys have been doing a great job open sourcing much of your work. So congratulations on that. Yeah, I think India has been having this last decade dual-sided play where the government builds a set of sort of minimal infrastructure, but infrastructure at population scale, but infrastructure not in the old style of portals, rather set of APIs. Infrastructure APIs as infrastructure is very not many governments do, but at our population scale we have been doing that so that innovators like you can onboard customer faster, do payments easier and cheaper, faster, and create, at the end of the day, create an inclusive marketplace like you guys are doing, which are beyond the top 50, 75, 100 million people. We have 900 million adults, so we have to take commerce and healthcare and education, everything else to the much deeper. Otherwise, we'll end up having the great divide, which is not a good thing to be in place, right? So whether it's in financial services, in commerce services, education, health, we must ensure that we continue to retain that diversity, inclusion, and choice for the large population. And for that, we've been doing this public infrastructure, private innovation combination reasonably well, I think, and probably the only country who is attempting at this kind of scale and this kind of pace in one sense. So pleasure to be here. Take me to whatever questions you want to ask, and we can have a free-flowing conversation. Absolutely. And we'll keep it reasonably short so that people are not tired. And I know it's been what, couple of days or
just this day. We started at 10 a.m.
But today, okay, a whole day. Oh my God. Okay.
Great, and I'm a big fan of the entire India Stack, the way it's shaping up, and more so as a technologist, I think I'm more intrigued by the behind the scenes, thought process and the mindset that goes into shaping it. probably, modern, many of your talks around this topic. Today, I would want to go to more of behind the scenes rather than the front end center.
Yes. Yes.
So that's how we'll, get started.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So let's start from the very beginning. And I would want to take you back to probably 2009 when Aadhar, as a universal ID, got launched for the entire Indian population. At that point, I mean, today, obviously, when everything has evolved, we, take point terms like India Stack and so on, right? If I take you back then, right, was it true India Stack already conceptualized in your head, or was it more of a singular, but still a critical enabling backbone and more of a platform that probably can pave the way for tomorrow, right? So, would want to hear your mindset from that point of time, and probably it's also relatable to many of us. When we work on, architectures on ecosystems, right? There's a starting point, and
Yeah.
the starting point there are probably few realities that are exposed to you. You try to absorb it and you start thinking about, okay, let me make the most beautiful architecture story work out, right? And maybe you do not know about what is going to unravel in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line. And this term evolvable architecture, probably in my head is probably more retrospective rather than proactive, right? So, but want to hear your thoughts as to, as an architect back then, was it already a visionary outlook that something will be evolvable, or let me take this platform one bit at a time and then shape it forward? So, want to take you back and hear your views.
So there are two sides to this part of the answer. Okay, I'll answer this differently. One, did we know everything about, even though we didn't call India Stack, but did we know the components of India Stack that's expected to emerge? Answer is partly yes, but partly no. For example, data empowerment or backend or some of the new work we are doing on the latest protocol side are very much shaped much later. And we were not even thinking about it. At least I was not thinking. Now, Nandan might have even had a more abstract view of some of that. But we definitely thought about couple of 2 or 3 things very early itself. And at least in our mind, we thought about solving these big puzzles later, which are identity, which is the project we got in. So Aadhar was purely an identity project. So we definitely knew we are going to solve ID problem. That's why we are there. But we definitely, during those conversations also, and this is interesting, we did not speak a lot about the solution at all. We spoke a lot about the problems. And that means, oh, bank account. Then we would ask bankers, why are you not opening bank? What happens? Oh, compliance issues. Oh, KYC. Oh, PMR. Okay. So why is it not possible to give this? Oh, okay. You had this issue. Okay, RBI has this regulation. Okay, then why would you not have a branch then? Oh no, branch opening is highly costly. We were kept asking. We had so many conversations about financial inclusion, for example, because we knew financial inclusion is a holy grail, that we must make sure the ID is useful in financial inclusion, because a useless ID is as useless as anything else. So we would have issued a bad looking, laminated Aadhar and nobody used it, right? That would have been a terrible situation to be in. So we were very clear we needed killer applications, right, to get the platform going. But financial inclusion was huge. We also unearthed a lot of government subsidy programs. We kept asking, why is ration or PDS, the fair price shop, so difficult? Why is it so corrupt? Why is so much leakage in cooking gas subsidy? What is the problem? The people are like, oh, no, that's because distributor. I said, why don't you go to another distributor? Oh, you can't go to another distributor. Why? Oh, it's because you're like old branch-based banking. Your account is only with that distributor, so you have to go to the same distributor. Oh, okay. That you realize bargaining power is actually with the distributor, not with the consumer, right? So you start asking portability fund. No, we are not solving anything. We are simply unearthing. So why behind the why behind the why? Because a lot of times, and as engineers and product guys, you will realize the use cases you hear, or supposedly the product manager use cases you hear, are actually quasi solutions. They're not actually the use cases, because they would have already processed the use case and say, oh, we need this feature. We need this feature is already solutionized in their mind. So they're asking the engineering team a solution rather than actually explaining the problem to you. So a lot of us as architect, we don't let product managers or product guys or domain folks, for example. We are not domain folks, right? We don't understand domain that, I mean, as well as somebody else who would spend a lot of time there in supply chain or financial industry or so on. But we would ask why behind the why. I think that's an extremely important part of that. So to answer the first part of the question, did we know everything about India Stack yet to come? No, but we started realizing few key problems in the why behind the why conversations, which are, oh, ability to open bank account or ability to sign. That signature and paperwork is very costly. Okay, so we knew one of these days we have to deal with signatures, digital signatures. One of these days we have to deal with document sharing. We realize every time you go, they're asking photocopy, then attested photocopy, gazette officer at that time attested. Even at that time we were all gazette officer attestation, all that thing. So we realized there is some trust issue in this paper doc. So DigiLocker was not formed in my mind, but the idea that some digitization of paperwork is necessary also started formulating. But that's pretty much it beyond the ID. Now, the second part of the question is, within the ID, is we knew very clearly, and that's where the evolvability and future part comes in, that we had to play identity platform play, not an identity card play. So which was very key, because one more identity card that you can show means you will go back to the same problem of trust in that ID verification. There's a photocopy of it and then attested copy. We still do other attested photocopy and all that thing, because the habits, go off very slowly in a large society. But nevertheless, we knew it has to be an identity platform play. That means it has to be API play. And we were very, very clear that we wanted. So when we started designing Aadhar, as an architect, answering to specific question, what is evolvability? So I can give you an example. We wrote our first authentication specification in 2010, and we had not even issued even the first Aadhar at that time. 2010 July, we actually started some early pre-processing of Aadhar, but September was the launch. 2010 September was the first Aadhar issuance, official Aadhar issuance. We had some operators and so on before that, but API was published before that. Auth API. Now, in the Auth API, I had to think about what happens when one fingerprint works or multiple fingerprint has to be used. How do we know? Maybe one fingerprint is not working. Maybe we need a fusion fingerprint. And nobody was telling me, how does fusion fingerprint work? Because nobody has done this before, right? Then I said, when smartphone had just launched, right? And smartphone, because 2008, 2009, smartphone. So 2010, we were already seeing the trend, smartphone and internet connectivity very clearly. Android already had come out. So we were very clear that, yeah, it's going to be the first device on every human's hand with CEP camera. That actually meant we could be doing one-time OTP, HOTP, TOTP kind of systems. We could be thinking face. Why would a commodity camera on my hand be used for authentication instead of punching in a password in somebody else's website? Because credential sharing in other website is always, this is why UPI, if you notice, you never share credential with them, right? It pops up in your app to enter your credential, unlike card and PIN on somebody else's device. That was okay when I did not have a device. When others had to device, I had to punch in my credential into somebody else's device, right? So we knew these trends are very clear. Now the question is, in the API, what do? I didn't know how multi-fusion fingerprints work. I didn't even know whether fusion and iris and auth can be used. We had no iris devices, but we knew iris can be used. Face authentication was way too early because, AI, ML technologies, we had to be used really, frankly, for face, and we were nowhere close to. We just launched, by the way. 10 years later, we launched face authentication. 10 years later, we launched face authentication, but we didn't have to change API.
Right.
So API, we had included multiple factors. I had included digital signatures very early, knowing that API response can be used as a token to say, like what's called currently it's called a zero knowledge proof. That means I could actually ZKPs and all, you talk about all this stuff because I can now prove to you that I am Aadhaar authenticated and I am above 18 without actually showing my Aadhaar. We wrote some of these use cases as early as 2010, saying, oh, this could happen in future, if this happens in future, and if face happens in future, and if combined multi-factor authentication starts happening in future, what API interface do I need now? That is evolvable, so that API interface doesn't completely change by the time I add face or I have to rewrite the whole thing. So if you look at the 2010 API and current API, we have very, very little difference. We have hardly changed the interface, but implementations, of course, dramatically changed behind the scene. We refactored the hell out of everything behind the scene to get to 1 billion people. We do 1.2 billion authentications every month these days.
Yeah, I think that's a very important insight for all of us engineers, architects alike, that, rather than jumping into solutions, asking your, counterparts on whys of whys and trying to get to, almost experience what you're trying to solve, bring the real world into your mind.
Yeah.
If you get to that, then probably even inadvertently, you will end up making choices, knowing that these are the possibilities in which way, the platform or APIs may get consumed. And then there'll be lesser chances of you going wrong because you'll not take wrong choices. You'll not discount a certain solution the way it can be consumed, right? So that's a pretty important, I think, insight for all of us. And probably then taking giant leap forwards from that point of time, right? So from a platform to where we are today, I would say it's more or less a digital backbone, almost like a digital grid that we have created, and a lot of value additions that can surface at the edges. And as a technologist, right, obviously I'm fascinated by the stack, but I also try to unwrap it and try to see what are those traits of this backbone that probably are appealing to me, right? For example, it's completely digital, which means it can drive a lot more of interconnectivity. It can allow for a lot of plug and play. And when you say you talked about inclusion, when you talk about inclusion and we are looking at the diversity of masses like in India, right, you have to get the interfaces right because you're taking the interfaces right to them, right? It has to be trusted, right? Right, and relatable kind of an interface. So all these jargons of it being digital, it being inclusive, extendable, interoperable, decentralized. I think behind those things, right, what I try to decipher is that if I have to apply some of the underlying principles into practice, into my own architecture stack, what are those triggers, that will make me, attack those problems, right? So it's almost like formalizing the way the platform needs to be shaped up. So probably would want to again touch upon these elements, right? Because either you would say that you continued your journey of answering all the whys, and hence all of these were automatic tick marks, or you had these probably in your notebook. You started writing down, okay, I need to be completely digital. I need to avoid middlemen, middle-aged softwares and so on. I need to create a grid which is probably plug and play at any point in the edge, right? So did you come up with that kind of a cookbook? Probably for architects and engineers listening out here, at their scope and level, they might formalize certain jargons like fitness functions and so on, right? So did you do that, or
Yes. So good question. And again, I think one thing I always keep in mind, and we are, a lot of us who are sort of volunteering to build this for the country are infrastructure builders. So we are not solution builders. And the fundamental difference is that we are building the highways. We are not driving the transport bus. Okay, we are the rail builders and not the train operators. Okay, there's a difference. Yeah. And when you build the infrastructure, we are always asking very interesting set of questions. Interesting question is one, the first point you raised, the infrastructure at the core is natively digital. Okay, at the core. At the edges, it need not be. Let me give you an example. Aadhaar-based payment, or even UPI for that matter, is designed very natively digital, obviously, at the back and the APIs and so on. But it's delivered in a phygital manner for the end consumer who is making an Aadhaar-based payment near the village in India Post. Let's say India Post is going with the point of sale system. For them, it's a physical and digital experience, phygital experience. This is not even a self-service. Most of the time, it's even assisted services. Yeah. So the question, a lot of times we tend to digitize the front, but keep a lot of physical at the back. That means we have human beings, we have people, we have processes, very heavy, physical back, which is not good. So in my mind, I want a natively digital kernel, but the delivery of solution could be very much a physical or digital or phygital affair, because India's diversity needs very different approaches over there. Sometimes you have an assisted device that is helping somebody make a payment, and all they are doing is putting a fingerprint, and everything else is physical. I get a receipt, I get a passbook, so our job is not to infrastructure builders. Job is not to think of those hundreds of solutions, but to enable hundreds of solutions. Now, to enable that goes back to your next set of points. So what do you keep in mind if such diversity has to be handled? What do you do with the kernel? Kernel level, what do you do and what do you not do? Yes, so I always have a set of rules of thumb and cook, the playbook rules that I maintain, and it's very important. And I'm an extreme fan of the two parts I built. One is infrastructure. What is the interface, API interface, if I were to call interface or specification interface of the infrastructure to the ecosystem that is outward looking? That means what is the interface to the ecosystem? That's where I spend a lot of time. UPI interface was spent, it took 1 year in my head to conceptualize literally UPI's interface. We talked about it in 2013, September, by the way, UPI. But 2014 is when the whole world even first saw the first PPT in one sense, right? So it took a year to formulate in our head, what is the most simplistic money movement look like? What does it mean? What does it mean? So you have to authorize the money, you have to authenticate the person, you have to, maybe do a few additional metadata. Then we unbundled everything in my head. So I said, can UPI be done with PIN only? Can UPI be done only on smartphone? Why not? Why not a kiosk using a face? Possible. UPI is just a money movement protocol, right? So I imagined all these things based on that, getting to the interface right. So getting that interface right, in the sense, not right is not the word, generic enough. That interface generalized and forward-looking. Future, that's where evolvability. I'm a huge believer that I will never get it right. I always believe I will never get the first time right. Okay, I'm almost 100% right about that I'll never get it right. But I separate the implementation versus interface. A lot of engineers mix up both. Today, I have to release this product in 3 months. So my interface is as short-term thinking as the implementation. I actually tell people that think interface, you think long-term. Implementation, you think short-term. For example, when we did UPI or Aadhaar, the first implementation was completely rewritten. Completely. I mean, at least 3-4 times. So we refactored the whole thing out and rewrote. Interfaces have not changed much, because when the infrastructure is used by many people, hundreds of institutions around us, you cannot change them. I mean, the change is so costly that you get stuck in time. So the interface is important. I don't care about the stack. implementation stack, I meant. So there are two parts to the infrastructure: outward facing interface and the actual implementation. Implementation, I don't care. I tell people just hack a code. I don't care. Yeah. But for that, my next playbook is the automation. So interface automation is, again, I always tell people that you will get it wrong. Okay, take it from me, you will not get it to a population. So you can't imagine what a billion people operating on this even mean. Okay, we sort of know, but you can't get it right. You don't even have time and resource. We had a 200 square feet tiny data center when Aadhar started. I could not have designed a benchmark for 1 billion people at that time, but I knew I will have to end up benchmarking later. And when I bench, I knew I'll end up rewriting because our developers would have written some crappy code because we had to launch it. Prime Minister had to launch it. We had to do some demos. We had to do all that usual stuff that we have to do when we do that. But interface, very, very, I so much time I take on my interface design, that we interface, but not user interface, API interface design, the interfaces to the thing. So much time. That's why I'm saying I took a year for UPI interface, literally to simplify, and make. That's why UPI interface has not changed at all. But we launched PIN, we launched now AEP as other payment. The fingerprint-based payment is actually on UPI behind the scene. It's all on the same interface, by the way. It can do e-vouchers, it can do recurring payments, it can do IPO payments, it can do gifting, it can do all that thing, right? Because we imagine the simplicity very clearly. Now, very soon, we are hoping UPI will have face authentication and so on, so that we can get to the next 200 million, include even further and further and so on. Interface is not going to change at all. Programming interface for the rest of the ecosystem. But behind the scene implementation will continue to get refactored. So I had a bunch of these rules. And as architect, you must remember, if you are building an API for someone else to use it, if that's your job, if you are an end product architect, then you have to worry about the actual use case. You have to worry about the user base and their study, their behavior, and all that thing. But if you are a platform builder, it's all about API interface. Get the API interface, take a lot of time on API interfaces. Implement crappy stuff, don't care. You can rewrite and rewrite, provided you have automation. So if you don't have good interface and if you don't have good automation, you're doomed from day one. I can tell you right now. Okay, you can't go anywhere with any of this. And this is because that's where the evolvability comes from me. Evolvability comes from me that because I can think through future possibilities and use cases and what we do. In my mental model, and when backend team, I actually tell them, you're writing APIs. All you do is protocol play, open source APIs. You're not even implementing it. But how do you test it? I make them write hundreds of all kinds of imagination use cases. The community, open source community, comes up with all kinds of imagination use cases. Nobody is doing any of that. In future, if it is on blockchain, if this happens, if commerce happens, what happens? Then say, do a stress test. So we do a design stress test, not a software stress test. We do a design stress test. That means stress the API and ask this question: how much of this interface, API interface, will change if that happens? Okay. And so that stress test was very, very key for me to get that evolvability right. And then I automate from day one. I'm a huge believer of test driven. And if APIs are not automated, we are not in the game. We are not in the platform. We don't even bother. I mean, I just keep telling, we can always postpone automation, but it's a disaster waiting to happen. If you don't automate it, you have no ability to refactor. And if you have no ability to refactor, you're assuming about everything right on day one, which is never right. But diversity happens at the end. Okay, so market players like you take UPI, you take Aadhar, you take various systems, that APIs, infrastructure systems, and then you're combining them into your, whether you're merchant onboarding or other cases, and you are creating the final solution. So you are the next layer of solutioning for the infrastructure. For us, it's like building a city's blueprint or a highway, not knowing what is in future. Really, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure all of us are probably gaining a lot from these perspectives. For me,
By the way, I don't even know, Utkarsh, one thing I can tell you, I don't care about the stack we use.
Yeah.
And so a lot of engineers, I can tell you, young engineers, you get stuck with, actual stack.
Right.
Oh, we have to use Go language or Rust or JavaScript and Node.js and or any of this new age cool stuff that keeps coming up. Since I started programming late 80s, I know the amount of stuff that I've gone through in my life and I had to relearn and restudy and syntax and new systems. I realized this is continuously new stuff will keep coming in. But what are you trying to solve? Traceability, maintainability. I talk about these kind of things. If you want a sustained 4.6 billion transaction on UPI, I ask them question, if something goes wrong, even a 0.1% is a lot of transaction. 0.1% of that is a lot of transaction. How are you tracing in real time? You can't keep bringing it down and bringing it up. So a lot of that is a pattern that you need to construct in your head and build it in. I think the investment is mostly there, not in the actual logic.
Yeah.
That's a funny thing. Actual logic is reasonably straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the right thought process. I think those vocabularies are in my head also a lot more important. Characterize what you're building. I mean, I think, like I was saying, the story to me is coming together very coherently, right? Right from whys of whys and trying to understand the problem space to thinking about interface that you'll present to the outside world in a more formal way. Keep it generic, keep it consumable, keep it relatable, right? Who are the personas who will consume it? If you get things wrong there, then it'll start falling apart. And one important observation that I made also was that the act of early validation is very important, which is your automation story. You may go wrong, but catch it early and course correct it before it becomes a huge ball of fire which you cannot douse, right? So I think those are really important storylines for me.
And actually, you guys should look at, if developers have not looked at UPI API, you should actually look at the original paper we published and the UPI API first. Okay, it's a very interesting paper because that, I think, tells you all we did was that API interface, one API, which moves money instantly. And we could have done because we already had Paytm at that time, right? Paytm was pretty successful, QR code, single click payment. Paytm was doing really well, and as a wallet provider at that time, continue to do well. But what it means is that we could have imitated a Venmo or a Paytm and call it UPI, right? We could have said, okay, this is a public version of it, and this is a sort of public good version of it. But we would have assumed, yeah, it'll work on smartphone, it'll work with Spin, and it would have been so simple. By the way, it would have been actually simple to develop. But we said, no, that's not UPIs. For UPIs, we wrote very few characteristics in there. The virtualized ID in UPI, you should read that paragraph in that paper. How did we virtualize? UPI can use card, PIN, fingerprint, face, self-service in a kiosk or ATM. UPI can be used in all the scenarios. We are not even seeing all of them yet, even after 5 years, because we are still in the, but the interface already allowed all that thing. And the API interface, the protocol already encapsulated these ideas that we will need. A digital signature could be used as a payment mechanism, by the way, without PIN today in UPI. The API interface allowed it. Is it allowed yet in the RBI? Is it allowed yet in the applications? Not yet. So it was at least a decade forward-looking, forward-looking interface. Very, 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 very powerful and very, very diverse scenarios were addressed to say, if that happens, how would we plug it in? So we created the plug and play, right? The auth and authorization, authentication was so unbundled in UPI. I could plug any authentication there with nothing else changing in UPI. The developers should read that paper. It's available somewhere in Google if you hunt for it. Yeah.
And probably this is also the logical point to talk about, thinking about tomorrow, keeping the future in your mental model, but implement, for today.
For today, right? Yeah.
So probably let's dive a bit deeper on it and contextualize it to, developers' life. Is always, I mean, you want to keep it generic, you want to keep a handle on all the kind of personas that will consume this interface and so on. And that might lead to some kind of a conflict in your mind, that are you over engineering for certain use
Yeah.
cases probably that are not required today, versus solving for today where there are the real needs. Because there are, obviously in this world, in corporate world, you'll have delivery timelines, suppressors,
Everywhere.
yeah, right. Yeah. So, what is the, balancing act here? And are there any, engineering traits, architectural traits that we should keep in mind between over engineering versus, solving for today, and not still missing out the bigger picture?
Yeah. But if you are a platform player, if you believe fundamentally as a company, you are a platform player that would emerge into wide variety of use cases. I think Flipkart even started now hospitality industry, right? You are actually already going in there. I thought you're probably there already. Yeah. I mean, you started with books literally like Amazon, and then went on to all kinds of things. And I mean, even then, how do we know what the commerce, yet to be there? I'll give you an example. By the way, I come from supply chain. I built retail commerce products earlier, pre-Aadhar days. 99. This is 99. Okay, so many of the people listeners may not, I don't know whether they may be barely born, or maybe 4 or 5 years old or whatever. In 99, we, as part of the supply chain product, we were a 40 people company in Boston, Series B funded retail supply chain product startup. And our idea was to create, at that time, 99 was the first bubble, internet bubble, right? Everybody was creating all kinds of this.com, pet.com, dog.com, cat.com, and all. Then on the .com era, it's called the .com era, right? Everybody created a .com, and then 2611, it went bust a little bit, and then, again continued in a stable manner. So this is the history. At that time, we were supposed to come up within 4 months. We were supposed to come up with a typical shopping cart, sales order stack. Because there were so many .coms coming in, we could sell the same stack and say, yeah, it has the standard APIs, sales order API, inventory API, available to promise ATP API, and do a typical, book an order, confirm an order. I mean, so the post check card and make a payment, and you just unbundle the shopping cart experience and catalog APIs. We had all those basic APIs, and that was what I was a CTO, and so I was asked, let's do this. And I have 5 customers. So the CEO went and signed up 5 customers before he even wrote a single line of code. Okay, this is in the good times of .com, and then we were supposed to do it. I'll give you an example over there. What did we do? I could have done a simple web page, simple. This is 99. I could have done a Java based simple stack and said, yeah, here is a set of shopping cart objects and catalog objects, and and you can theme it and customize it to your product or website and launch it. What's the big deal? There's a database on the back. Database takes care of orders. The first thing we did is to write set of APIs. 99. In 99, we had 200 plus XML based APIs. JSON was not born at that time, so we were using all XML. XML was not known to people, but we had all XML based APIs. 200 plus APIs we wrote, only APIs. First point. So we said, okay, we'll first quickly build, because we knew the domain. So we built APIs. What are those building blocks APIs we need to create a shopping? Because we knew the CEO was very forward looking. He said, yeah, who knows? We might go and sell to B2B also. We might go and sell abroad also. That we know it can be, why is it only in the US we were selling? We could have sold it anywhere else. So we need multilingual, you never know where we'll go. But you have 4 months to launch. So you basically have no time to code. Right. So we were in a situation of what do you design for and what do you code for? That's a subtlety. So we designed for future. That means and an example of that is that even then, in 99, first design, we knew What is an order? Will always in the .com, I will take the order and do I fulfill it myself from my warehouse? That's what our customers are selling. But what if we don't have it? Could we fulfill it from our partner, from another warehouse who I don't own? If that is the case, then it's eventually a purchase order, because I took an order from the consumer, but I split that order because I don't have it, and I gave it to a partner who is behind it to sell it. And that the leg between me and the partner is a PO, purchase order. And that has tax implications and settlement and all that, because that's a 30-day settlement or whatever, 45-day settlement. Now, these days, maybe 1 week settlement with partners behind the scene marketplace, but consumers are paying here. So you have two orders actually. One sales order coming to you, and then you have a purchase order going. Then we said, but what's the difference between these two? If you look at the data structure, they look exactly the same. Somebody who places an order on somebody, order details, quantity, order line items, addresses, shipping address, and the payment rules and the shipping rules. They all look same. So we
question here, Pramod. I think sorry to interrupt, but I think a logical question crosses my mind. When we use these terms, sales order, purchase order, I think while English word is relatable to everyone, getting into an act of formalization, right? Because when we talk about APIs, we talk about protocols, specifications. At that point, you need to formalize it, right? And you need to probably arrive at certain vocabulary. And because there are so many players out here, right? You might be talking to a guy running a warehouse. You may talk to corporates like Flipkart. You may talk to some middleman distributors and so on. While roughly they talk the same English language, but I think formalization of these vocabularies as to because what protocol tends to do is unifies the vocabulary. So from your experience,
no, we didn't unify the vocabulary. So there are two things we did, and that's why brilliant question, by the way. That's exactly, so that example I thought in the Flipkart scenario I could give. It's in 99, 2000, right? We had exactly one API called order API internally. So we called it, and internally it was an order API. You could create an order, you could book an order, hold an order, update an order, split an order, cancel an order, or whatever the actions, CRUD plus actions that you could do on that order object. Then we created a vocabulary layer on top of that, allowed to say, oh, this is a purchase order. Oh, this is a return. By the way, when we did return, we used exactly the same API. What is return? We convert in our product in 2000, used by Best Buy, Target, Walmart. Everybody used it. We dominated the market. Return was another order, but with no money attached to it. It is a reverse money attached to it. Address was reversed, but the structure was exactly the same. Purchase order was same. We had inter-warehouse transfers, what's called a transfer order, or inventory replenishment order. We had replenishment, but we converted everything to say anything that moves goods from one endpoint to an endpoint which may have money attached to it, which may not have money, which has shipping rules attached to it, so they may not have shipping rules, is an order internally. Then we created a vocabulary layer, or what you call a taxonomy layer on top of that, that allowed various enumeration-based domain-specific names to be applied. So in the UI and in everywhere you saw create a return. We saw that actually everywhere. So when you create a return, internally it was still calling exactly one API. And the data structure, which allowed us to be so flexible. I can tell you, we went to B2B, B2C. We went in logistics, by the way. We sold it to DHL and FedEx worldwide. Same platform. For third-party and four-party logistics, they were using the same thing for managing their third-party logistics. Which they also, the same thing. I'm moving goods and I'm storing goods. And so we had unbundled it so carefully into core 200 set of APIs, which are generic in the storage. Then we created a taxonomy and vocabulary layer above that allowed us to create very specialized B2B vocabulary or a B2C vocabulary around that in machine readable XML fashion. So we had XML vocabulary APIs on top of that layered it. then user interface. By the way, we didn't even build a user interface until we built APIs. But in the implementation though, in the first 4 months or 6 months when we launched it, we implemented almost none of these features. We implemented simple order taking flow. That means if you call with a purchase, we had no vocabulary. We couldn't create a purchase order in 4 months. But when we added purchase order feature, we did not have to add a new API. We did not have to add a new data structure behind the scene, new tables. So because what is purchase order and sales order? Half the time your guy who are purchasing are the same guy who was selling also. It's very fungible in a market, right? That's what you think. People are buyer are also sellers. So it's very very tricky. So you don't hard separate or purchase order tables are lying around here and sales order tables are lying around. Returns are lying somewhere else. No, we had one data structure, one API, but we did not have logic to deal with returns and so on. So we had to write pluggable logic later. So implementation was very, very much for 4 months, 6 months, kept adding feature. But these core data structures were so well defined. It was very, very forward looking, I can tell you. Gartner and Forrester at that time has written about it. And then we wrote about service oriented architecture, how these guys have built so much APIs in 2000 when nobody was even talking about API based systems, right?
Yeah. So I think earlier you touched upon generic, whether it's API or vocabulary. It has to be relatable, and probably there's an element of minimalism also that never bloat it up. It to absolutely the facets that that personas will understand and can exchange interdata around it.
And I think in my mind there is a difference between simplicity of the user interface, simplicity of the actual solution is very different from simplicity of API. What does it mean? They're not the same. API is not meant for end users, right? APIs are meant for someone else to build on top of you.
That's right.
So that design constructs are slightly different from come into actual interface, actual user interface. User interface had to be so carefully created. It is very difficult to generalize user interface, very difficult to generalize and future-proof user interface. But the more you future-proof the underlying building blocks, you are able to rewrite and rebuild newer user interface faster because your underlying blocks are ready. So you can write a kiosk-based ordering, or you can use some Android TV-based interface or whatever as it comes. But generalizing user interface is not what I'm asking. User interface has to be very specific. Very simple to use cases. But to build that is very costly. As you all user interface is a pretty costly affair. And that user interface cost has to be taken out because your underlying building blocks, the Lego blocks, are all ready. And if that's ready, then user interface can be crafted. Slightly less cost effective and wider user interface. Right? Who knew smartphone and internet? And we were on desktop at that time, right? But because everything was API, when smartphones came in 2009, the same company launched smartphone app or interface pretty fast. And then that company got acquired later on.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest takeaway for me. I mean, observing the India Stack evolve over a period of time. So what you're not focusing on is an end-to-end solution. You're not trying to connect the dots.
Yeah.
You are creating probably a craftsman tool that on top of it, a lot of innovations can get powered. Innovations which corporates even in a private setup like PhonePe, it grew out of UPI, right? Or the other spectrum, which is more appealable to me, is how does it unlock value, a real value to the end customer, an individual, in the system. I think that's the beauty of it. I think all of us are here to probably innovate on top of this stack, and that probably for me the most appealing factor.
But I think that's very, very clear to us. If we were building the highways, we were building the railroads, we knew folks like you who are innovating, solutioning to a particular set of domain, particular set of target use cases that you are after, will have to do that job, and we can't do that job at all. So we were, other than creating some reference demo apps, that's what we did, right? Demo apps, because sometimes you need a demo to okay, I get it. Now I can improve on it. Sometimes you need that seed trigger But other than that, even backend, we have some one or two reference apps there. Other than that, but what would actually get done in, let's say, in a village at a CSC center? Somebody is making a payment and is a Hindi speaking person at a CSC center, a farmer making a payment. What should be the actual experience and interface? Why would it do? How would it work? It's a thing that we believe. That's why India's diversity necessitates both, all three players. I keep talking about that as Sarkar, Samaj, and Bazaar, to all innovate. But for them to innovate full stack is very costly, especially companies like you, because you have large capital backing, so it's easier. But imagine an NGO who is working on edtech, an NGO working on a farmer help or whatever. It's very difficult to do the kind of engineering might that you have, right, with that NGO. So question we are a lot of time asking is that what can we do in many times as building blocks that allows rapid, cost-effective solutioning by the ecosystem. And that's so for us, it's about minimalism. For us, it's about distributing the ability to solve, not solving.
Yeah.
We are distributing the ability to solve and hoping that many of you will step up.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the most novel way of probably contributing through tech to, back to
Society, I suppose. Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay. I'm conscious of time. I know it's late evening.
Probably will take one
Yeah.
probably last closing note from you. And probably, I mean, to tie all of it together, we talked about a lot of functional aspects. Maybe, just a last thought around scale. Right. So probably, long time back, right, when you would be seeing this evolve, I mean, who would have, while that we are targeting a huge customer base, but how does it all come together? Because there it's not about APIs, it's about probably the infrastructure behind.
Yeah.
Right? Infrastructure also needs to be future scale ready. Any quick thoughts on it? Probably that the entire story.
Very good. So again, you can do big ones. You've already seen our Aadhar and UPI both all doing in 1 billion transactions plus in every month. We built both using open source stack. So entire Aadhar system is built using open source, and entire UPI is built on open source. And UPI was one of the first and only payment system in the world that doesn't use an RDBMS in that kind of sense of RDBMS, or even using any IBM, because financial industry is also, that's what they believe in, right? How do you run UPI on Redis and all? People freak out, right? No, it's too risky. But we built on it. So I think, to answer your question, I do not worry about code scale. Okay, let me put it this way. I worry about design scale.
Yeah.
Does the design scale, is there anything in the design that actually prohibits you from linear scale to, and my number is always 100x. So in Aadhar, in 2011, when we benchmarked, and some of the Mindtree guys are all there, Raghu is in Flipkart, I think. When Raghu was my chief architect there, I used to tell him 100x we should benchmark, and he says 100x. We have like 1,000 people in the Aadhar system. Why do you have to do 100x? I said 100x tells me design. I just want to make sure my design is scale proof, not code. Don't worry about code. Code can be rewritten. Design changing is very, very fundamental. Design patterns are very difficult to change. So is it asynchronous? Is it, what are you doing? Is there a particular calls or a pattern that is going to cause a non-scale issue because of, let's say, everything goes to a particular database, or this one component in the middle is going to choke it, because it's like Silk Board in Bangalore. Everybody is going to come to that, and it doesn't matter how many highways you build around it, just one market is going to choke it. So we asked this question. I'm only worried about design scale, because I think I'll tell you why. UPI code was written 3 times behind the scene, refactored big time, but the design was not refactored yet. It's completely asynchronous API, and it is quite nicely unbundled enough for me to know it'll scale. Okay. But initially we might have to throw more machines because you wrote a bad code. And then you subsequently make sure that you refactor it, squeeze it really well. But 2 things I worry about scale is actually less about code. It's design scale and ability to maintain what's called a manageability scale. Manage at scale. How do you manage the system at scale is also a design pattern that we must think. What happens when 4 billion transactions happen and failure happen? Almost always developers again ignore the failures because we are very good at testing test cases, and we are very good at testing 99% it works really well. Why is my superior unhappy about that 1% who's failing type of situation, right? But I worry about a lot of that about exception, because exceptions when handle, we don't know how to handle. We are not taught through exception handling. It creates a snowball effect into the other positive side also. So worry about design scale, worry about exception handling, and worry about manageability at scale. Not manageability without scale, manageability at scale. These two are more important. Code itself, I'm less worried about it, because once you have a good automation, good interface, you can rewrite the code, right?
Yeah. It's cool. I think always a pleasure talking to you. I could go on and for hours, and you know me well that way. But obviously we have the pressures of the time. So unfortunately we'll have to wind it up. Thanks a lot for accommodating this talk in very early hours. I know you are in the US time zone. Really humbled and honored to have you here.
No, pleasure to be here. And Utkarsh, you have been a great friend, great supporter, and I always bounce off a lot of ideas with you as well. And as will I continue to look forward to bouncing off. We have so much stuff yet to build, so I will bouncing off new ideas with you as well. And all the best to everyone who's listening.
Thank you so much.
Take care.